Hello, Motorrad World fans, and welcome to Talking MotoGP Assen after a very long break, what felt like years, and it was only a couple of weeks, to be honest, but we are back talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and of course, my sidekick, my wingman, I should call him, Paul Scott. Paul, how you doing?
Yeah, Rob, all good. Thank you. Hope everything's good on your side. Yeah. It felt like an eternity, but when we watched racing last weekend, that eternity had gone by in the blink of an eye. And as we're obviously going to discuss, well, in those 3 weeks from when we finished chatting on that Tuesday night till this weekend, I mean, just so much has happened and so much has changed.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to talk about, and we've got a lot of people already joining us. Jacques Smuts, Yvonne Pretorius, Wayne Taylor, Dick Crosby, Dave McBain, Al Camino, Superfly Racing ZA, David Howes, Nicole Breert from Cape Town, Sean Claessens. Everyone already tuned in to hear what we've got to say. And of course, remember, get all those comments in. I'll try to keep as up to date as I possibly can with the comments on the side, but it is a talk show for the fans, by the fans. Scott Mordaunt, Bradley Johnson, everybody tuning in. And a big thank you once again to Rad KTM in Santon and in Pole, Rad Pole, and of course Ridgeway Race Bar. If you want to go enjoy all the live MotoGP action on big screens, get down to Ridgeway Race Bar, get your entries in, and you could win a brand new KTM 1290 Super Adventure R. So brilliant there. Mike Teal, good evening, Rob. Regards from myself and grandson Liam Townsend. Mike and Liam, consistent watchers, so thank you so much for joining us. Speed Angle SA, hello gents, looking forward to the show. Brandon Kraling, hi Rob, from Brendan from Port Elizabeth, and Mart van Jaarsveld, Jaden Sneyman as well, super excited for tonight's show. So yes, Paul, we said so much happened off track in between the break from the last race. If you have been living under a rock and you haven't quite kept up to times and you're not following Motor Rider World's Facebook page, let's just give you a brief description of what's happened. Marc Marquez will be joining the factory Ducati team from 2025 onwards. We know that Martin had, in a way, been snubbed by Ducati, and he has since signed for Aprilia for next year. So those were the real big two movers and shakers. And once those pieces fell into place, it really did open up the market for all the other riders to kind of be put in place. Now, we could talk about Mark and the Martin thing for days and days, Paul. But the big move for me, the big moves that I didn't see coming, I saw the Bastianini because it had been mentioned over the weekend at Magellan. And then what I didn't see happening, and I don't know about you and everyone that's watching here, I did not see the Maverick Vinales to Tech 3 KTM for next year alongside Bastianini and alongside Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta in this four-man full factory KTM team. Two in the factory team as it is now, and the other two, Bastianini and Vinales, in the Tech 3 team, but all in full factory Red Bull KTM colors. Now, surely, yes, there's going to be Bagnaia and Marc Marquez and Bezzecchi and Martin and Aprilia, all good teams, but that four-man KTM team, surely this has got to be the recipe with all that flavor to finally just take KTM to that next level. No disrespect to Jack and Augusto Fernandez, but Bastianini, Maverick Vinales, surely this has got to take the project to the next level now with all that information.
Yeah, Rob, and we've certainly been talking about it, so we're not bashing anybody. But Augusto Fernandez and Jack Miller have not been getting the results. We've discussed it on numerous occasions. So obviously KTM, and Jack was very vocal about the way they went about it. But I think this whole thing happened in an instant almost. If you think of it's a puzzle, and all the pieces have now started fitting. So you can't look at the KTM Tech 3 deal in its, on a standalone basis. You've got to look at quickly and say, well, look what happened to Martin. And he made a decision literally in one day. They spoke to him in the morning. The deal was signed in the evening after he had got snubbed. Then did not the same thing happen with KTM, where suddenly Maverick, who now he's not going to be the glory boy. Martin's jumping into his team. What happens to him? Is he now suddenly thinking to himself, yes, well, I'm going to be second fiddle once again. But if I jump ship to Tech 3, even though it's a satellite team, I'm running exactly the same bikes, maybe I'll be the main boy here. So that's what I think happened. That's why it all happened within the space of, I think it was 4 days. Because of the fact, in the back of his mind, he was like, yes, I'm scared I'm going to lose out on this deal, so I better put pen to paper right now. And that's, I'm going to go back to what I said about Jack not being happy about how KTM had said, no, we want to keep you in the fold. And then a day later, they gave him his marching orders. I don't think they would ever have intended to do that. But the way this whole thing panned out in the space of 4 days for the main players, the Mavericks, the Bastianinis, the Martins, time was of the essence. So that's why I think it happened so quickly. And, as you say, it was in the space of 3 or 4 days. Everything fell into place. I'm going to call it the main guys. Obviously, there's spaces at Honda, there's spaces at Yamaha, but that's not going to scare Bastianini, Marquez, Martin, etc. for next season. So that's my take on it. I just think guys were so quick to make a decision, get the thing finalized, and have their bum in a good seat before someone else had a little side entry to worm their way in, maybe a De Gian Antonio or whatever the case might be. So I think that was part of the reason this whole thing for the main players happened so quickly.
And it's a super team. I mean, that is a 4-rider lineup, and credit to KTM and everyone involved with making that happen, because before this little break that we've had, we were already looking at a strong team. If you had told me a month ago that would be the KTM team heading into 2025, or certainly at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't have believed you, and I would have thought, right, this is huge intent from KTM. And this is sometimes where it's very easy to get frustrated with KTM and the fact that they're not progressing as fast as Ducati, and Brad is still handcuffed in many ways, but they certainly are putting their money where their mouth is to lift this project. And I'm excited at that prospect. I mean, Bastianini, Vinales, we know the MotoGP credit that they bring. It's not again, no disrespect to Miller or Augusto Fernandez. It's not, Miller, who had the odd shining ride that came in to not only bring a bit of development, but also help sell some shirts and stuff. Augusto Fernandez was Moto2 world champion. So, right, it's only right that you give him the chance. You've got 4 of the fastest riders in MotoGP in your team next year. Pedro's still learning, as we saw again this weekend. That learning is going to continue, but next year is going to be a completely different animal. And if that KTM project can just take, as I said, take all the flavor of the Brad, the Maverick, the Nea Bastianini, and the Pedro, and throw that into the dish, a la what Ducati have done for the past 10 years or whatever, taking all those different rider flavors. That's the one thing we've said all the time, is Ducati have always been able to pull from these different riding styles, these different personalities, and put it into this bike. And Gigi just rubs his hands, because when he goes into his kitchen, he's just got all this flavor to play with. Now KTM is in that position. Wayne Taylor says here, Ducati must surely be weaker next year besides the 2 factory boys, and they have lost big assets like Jorge Martin, Bastianini. They are losing these guys. They're gaining a Marc Marquez, which we'll talk a little bit about later, after the Assen weekend. Still hasn't kind of lit the world on fire kind of the way we thought he was going to be. Again, you told me when he had signed for Ducati by Assen, he hadn't won a main race on a Ducati yet. I would have been like, no, he would have won 3 races at least. But anyway, so they've got this Pecco and this Marc Marquez combination in the factory team, which is great. You've got 2 great personalities. Managing that, we still know, is a question mark. But then you look further down that you're losing Pramac. More big news is Pramac have ended the relationship with Ducati and signed a 7-year deal with Yamaha to run full factory Yamaha bikes in MotoGP and the Moto2 team to really be their feeder into the factory team for youngsters development and everything. So in many ways, yes, Ducati gained this Marc Marquez. Is it the Marc Marquez at the height of his powers that they think and hope they're getting? We don't know, but certainly they are losing a lot in terms of rider quality, and Pramac, who has been their main source of development for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to make that point that Wayne's made, that Ducati are definitely going to be weaker next year, regardless of the fact that they've moved Mark up a tier. And I agree with you, Rob. I thought by now he would have been, when I say better, he's been consistently the best 23 model bike, but he just isn't where Martin and Bagnaia are. You can't even dispute that. But saying that, let's see what he does on the factory bike. His temperament, his ability, his desire, his belief will all lift him up another level next season, I have no doubt. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to happen with Martin and Bastianini, and Bezzecchi is a little bit of a worry to me at the moment. But anyway, so yeah, Ducati are losing 2 very good riders and they're losing 2 bikes off the grid. So let's presume they're losing 2 old spec bikes. They're still going to supply 2 factory bikes to Grassini or VR46, whichever way it goes.
Yeah.
But they've lost a Martin who you can't, I mean, he's been leading the championship from round 1. Yes, Pecco at the moment seems to have him under control, but Martin is still leading the championship. He's shown that he's consistent, he's fast. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. It's definitely changed the dynamic, absolutely no doubt. Going back to the KTM story, I like the idea. Now we've got 4 super fast guys to pull info. There's no doubt that's a benefit to the greater good of the whole team. What might not benefit Brad might benefit Pedro, which might benefit Maverick. So there's going to certainly be an improvement as the collective group. Ducati on the other side are losing, so I think it's going to level the playing field in terms of the steps Ducati have been making forward versus everyone else, because it's always been 8 versus the rest. And now now it's 6 and 4, but 4 super strong riders like you've just mentioned, and are the 4 best Ducati riders on the same level as those 4 KTM riders in terms of what they bring. It's going to be very interesting to see. Very interesting. Changes the dynamic nicely.
Yeah, Olimoto says it perfectly. Ducati have basically traded Martin, Bastianini, Bezzecchi, and Pramac for Marc Marquez. So they really have thrown their eggs into a big basket there. And as Delinea has come out and said, there will be 3 GP25s on the grid next season, not 4. So they are definitely downscaling Ducati, and in some way you have to feel sorry for them, because there was massive power. There's still all this massive power. Now KTM have post technicians and riders. They're literally just being pulled apart because of the success. They're victims of their own success. But that was always going to happen. My biggest question mark over Maverick Vinales is, we know he's never really sold himself as a team player. At Yamaha, he wanted all eyes on him, and when he didn't get it on him, he kind of showed a little bit more of that at Aprilia. But I think that was influenced by Aleix Espargaro, who I don't think he really ever saw as a threat. At Yamaha, he had Rossi and some other riders that he always saw as a threat. And when Maverick's threatened, he seems to curl up into a box and he doesn't know how to react. When Maverick's ultra confident, you can't stop the guy. We've spoken about this for days. So now Maverick's been put into this environment that is a tricky one. Brad Binder has proven that you have to be mentally strong for that KTM job, because it's just this. It's up and down and left and right and center. You're on top of the world, then you're at the bottom of the world, then you're loved, and you're one of the best MotoGP riders, then you're one of the worst MotoGP riders, and why are you in the class? So Maverick's going to have to deal with all of that mentally, and all these questions and all this pressure coming from the media and fans. I don't think he's fully been judged, or we've certainly been critical enough of him on the Aprilia. The Aprilia showed its worth. But we it's Maverick. If he performs, yay, great, we know the talent. But if he doesn't, oh well. I don't think KTM won't accept that, especially for the money that they're going to be throwing at him. So I'm interested to see how Bastianini, I'm not worried about. I think he'll fit right in there, and he's coming back home in many ways. He was a Red Bull athlete originally. I think he's going to find his comfort there. Maverick, to me, is the big question mark. If you can somehow, KTM can activate the happy-go-lucky Maverick, great signing. But if they activate the more so Maverick that we've seen over the years, that Yamaha Maverick and that Aprilia Maverick, I saw it this weekend with Maverick. Now that the KTM's deal's done, he had a bit more words to say about Aprilia, because now he knows he's not with him. Now it's like, no, we must fix the problems. It's not me, it's them. The bike's not good enough. Yeah. And you're like, oh, Maverick, your colors, my man.
Yeah. And Rob, we saw it last season at Aprilia. He struggled. Yes, he had 1 or 2 great weekends, but he actually struggled. And it was the same thing. When Aleix had a great weekend, 2 or 3 weekends after that, Maverick was kind of nowhere. So he definitely, whether he takes it in his head or in his heart, that when his teammates are beating him, he's not worthy, if that's the right way of phrasing it. Now he's got more problems. He's going to get on a bike, first of all. Let's be quite honest. It's competitive, but it might not be the easiest bike. Like you said, it's very up and down. He's got Brad, who's been on the bike almost from day dot, who's super fast when the conditions allow. And he's got Pedro. Obviously, Bastianini is going to be a dark horse. We've got to see how he adapts. But looking at Maverick, I think this puts added pressure on him. And we know if things don't go well for him, his demeanor changes after FP or after Friday morning practice, and the rest of the weekend just goes downhill from then. I think personally, I think it was a big risk for KTM, but I understand why they've done it, because they're looking at the collective. If they can get 4 guys to help one, that's what they want. I hope Maverick can fit into that. Like you say, we don't seem to see him as a pure team player, which, giving Jack Miller credit, that's certainly what he was. But I don't see Maverick fit in the same role. Maverick is there for Maverick.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anyone else isn't, but when the chips are down, like you say, now suddenly he's got things to say about Aprilia where he hasn't been saying anything. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be a very difficult dynamic, but very interesting at the same time.
Gary says, listening to you guys while assembling my daughter's IKEA wardrobe, brackets. You must know this drill in the UK, Rob. You guys keep me sane. Still of the opinion Pedro is good, but too hyped by the media. So, Gary, yes, I know the whole IKEA thing. I've built my fair few IKEA things for this flat that we're in. My biggest headache is the thought of moving, because you don't have big doors or spaces here in the UK, Paul. It's not like you can take your couch and your wardrobes over the balcony. That's all got to come back down. And Gary, I did it all with a flat screwdriver. I don't have drills. I'm not a tool man. So yeah, I've bashed heads with my fair few IKEA items. Paul, so moving on, obviously the news that broke just after the Assen weekend was that Pramac are leaving Ducati. They're going with Yamaha. The Campanotti, the Pramac boss, coming out and saying, he didn't exactly what we spoke about before, saying left a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth after Mugello when he saw Ducati celebrate the way they did when they beat Martin and Pramac, and he said it just looked like they were celebrating. They were celebrating beating a Ducati ride and a Ducati team like they'd beaten another manufacturer. So it left a bad taste. I'm pretty sure there was money that was involved in the deal, that obviously with Yamaha throwing big money. So cool. The deal's done. A 7-year deal for Pramac to go for Yamaha. My biggest concern now is the quality of rider that Pramac are. It's great that you can have this development team in a way, 2 full factory bikes with Pramac. The big names, aren't on the table for them to help develop this project. Names like Digi, I think, is your best bet. It looks like he is definitely one of the riders that's going to the Pramac Yamaha team. I think that's a brilliant signing. He's impressed me. I know he's impressed you. The Digi kind of exercise is growing on me. He's established himself as a solid MotoGP rider. The second seat, however, is a question mark. They're giving Iannone a test apparently soon on the bike to see how that plays out. I'm not in favor of Iannone. I think it's old. I think just leave him in World Superbikes. Let him live his days there. Let him be happy. Let him become, the chiseled chin, blue-eyed boy there. The problem is, who else do they go for then to really help elevate that project? Now, I was thinking about this, and now we've spoken a couple of times about there's no one really putting their hand up other than Aldeguer in Moto2 saying, I'm ready for MotoGP, and I was worried about it. But then I really got to thinking over this weekend, watching Moto2 again, and thinking of the Fabio Quartararo process when he came into MotoGP. Fabio was not, setting the world of Moto2 alight. He had a couple of good rides, put him in MotoGP, and he thrived. He climbed on that Yamaha and he did things I did not think was going to happen, and he became a MotoGP world champion. I think Pramac need to go that, instead of looking at what's available in MotoGP now, which, to be honest, there's a lot of seat fillers, and I mean that with all due respect. I'm talking riders that are going to climb on there and make a difference. I think they should be brave enough to go for a Moto2 rider, a Garcia, an Agura, a Canet, or one of those riders, because I think I would, if I was Yamaha right now, I would rather have a Moto2 rider come in, fresh ideas, doesn't know anything in MotoGP, doesn't know. He's coming with fresh ideas to try and elevate that project, rather than getting a Miller, an Iannone, any of these other riders that are being mentioned, Augusto Fernandez, who are going to climb on there. And I know we always talk about, but he's bringing this Ducati information and this Aprilia information and this Honda information. That doesn't work. Same with KTM, have kind of proved it. It doesn't work, because what's the point of doing that? Trying to make something that it's never going to be. A KTM is never going to be a Ducati. So why do that? So I think Yamaha need to find their own path, go with their own path, and find this youngster that's going to help take them into the future, rather than, right, let's get a guy with MotoGP kind of credentials because he's going to help us develop. He's got Ducati knowledge. And I think start from a blank piece of paper and trust one of the Moto2 riders. Kind of like what you said they should have done with DJ Antonio for HRC.
Yeah, I think that's the thinking. So get a DJ and Antonio, put him in as your experienced lead rider, and then get a guy from Moto2 who you, like you say, Quartararo, when he moved up, I think there were a lot of people were very surprised. But clearly they had seen something and they recognized the talent because, as you said, I think he only won 2 Moto2 races. Now they move him into the MotoGP world, and straight away he was competitive. And I've said it before, Rob, I think it might be that no preconceived idea. So you get on the bike, you're not expecting it to do A, B, or C. You know how to race a motorbike, you know how to race a motorbike fast. So you get on this and immediately you can learn for yourself. Where, like you say, get a Augusto Fernandez. I mean, the list of options, Oliveira, Miller. You're getting guys that are, to be quite honest, as you said, seat fillers, and no disrespect to them. They are superb motorcycle racers. But we're comparing them to a Bagnaia, who at the moment has just moved the goalposts once again. So, yeah, I think that would be a great move. Just as a curveball, which has been bandied around, and I think it's more from management than from himself, Toprak. What do you think about him? Do you think BM are going to let him out of that contract? Because clearly he's in line to win the championship this year, all things being equal. I watched him at the last round and he was fantastic. He was really the class of the field. But BM are already saying, because of the rumors, BM are saying, no, we've got a contract for next year. So are they going to put their foot down? If not, is he the guy to put on the bike and say, okay, you're our rookie, you're our do what you want guy, but the Gian Antonio will be the lead guy if it happens to be Digi or whomever they put there. I don't know if Toprak should come to MotoGP, to be quite honest. He's good. He's at the moment the class of the field, but to move from superbikes, and just on that subject, I just hope he doesn't come across. But anyway, the difference at the moment in rider ability from Bagnaia to Taka Nakagami is huge. Now, what's going to happen to Toprak? Because he's going to fit in at the very bottom. So I don't know. Just an interesting thing. And I think it's more whether it's clickbait or Sofoglu just mouthing off because they're looking to up the ante. I don't know.
I'm going to disagree with you. And I'm going to say I'm a massive Toprak has got to go to MotoGP, man. Toprak is at the peak of his powers. He won on a Kawasaki, on a Yamaha, and now BMW. If you look where the BMW project is at the start of the year, when he climbed on it, has he improved it? Yes. You look at the Yamaha. Toprak was winning on the Yamaha 6 months ago. Johnny Ray can't buy a top 5, top 10 on that same Yamaha. Toprak to me has got that feel. I think he's got that touch, and he was going to be my next conversation piece here. To me, he's got that touch that'll climb into MotoGP and he'll make it work. I think he'll be fast. I think he'll take time. He's not going to do a Pedro Acosta. I don't think he hasn't come from that same grain. He'll take a time to adapt to the Michelins and the carbon brakes and all the things that come with MotoGP. But I just think he's got that touch. And if you look at his track record, every motorcycle and team he's been with, he's improved. And that's something not a lot of riders, can actually put on their CVs. Yes, they've been fast, but they've climbed onto a fast package that was already fast. We've spoken about Marini. Was he just over amplified by being on a Ducati? Well, yes, because he's proving where he is on the Honda. I think Toprak Razgatlioglu should be in MotoGP next year. I want him to be in MotoGP next year with all this flavor of Bastianini, Vinales, Tech 3, Martin Aprilia, Mark Factory Team. Throwing in a Toprak will just make it even better. And I think I think they are genuinely pushing this move because Toprak's not getting any younger. That window is kind of closing. Yes, there's talk about BMW coming in, and I think BMW are probably saying to him, listen, 2027, stick with us until then, we are going. Does Toprak want to go into MotoGP as a development rider? No. I think if he wants his MotoGP shot, if him and Sofoglu have said we want to go to MotoGP, we've got to go on prepared machinery. We've got to go on right, climb in and go. That's why the Yamaha, the Pramac Yamaha deal is that one he wants to go to, because you're going to be in a development role there. You're going to be trying to improve the project. For Yamaha, I think it'll be a great signing because, as I said, I think Toprak's got that certain something, that feel that Yamaha need to improve their package. Does Toprak climb onto a second Grassini seat that's available? Alex Marquez, Red Bull, Toprak, Red Bull. There's a lot of factors we've got to take into it. I don't know. I'm so excited. My mouth waters when I think of Toprak Razgatlioglu in MotoGP. I think he's already overachieved in World Superbikes, winning on that BM simply while the rest of the BMWs are finishing nowhere. Proves what a talent he is, and I hope to see that in MotoGP and unlocked once he's comfortable. And just, I think he'll flourish, and I think he'll raise many eyebrows, to be honest.
Just as a matter of interest, does Alex Rins only have a 1-year deal? As far as I know, it's only this year.
Yeah, so there is talk that I don't know. I also watched Rins this weekend. He's not confirmed for Monster Energy Yamaha. There's talk there will be either Pramac Yamaha or with a factory team. Those are his two options. I don't think a move.
So maybe a good move would be to put Rins in the Pramac if they don't take the Gian Antonio. Now, me personally, I'd like to see DG stay with VR46. Me personally, but let's say he goes to Pramac as their number one rider, then maybe move Rins in the same team as DG and Antonio and put Toprak in if that deal is going to happen. That could be put him with Fabio Quartararo, because I think that could be a good team to nurture him into MotoGP. Not that he's going to come in there and be looking for people to look after him. Exactly what you say. I agree. He's got that feel. He's definitely special. Maybe then elevate him immediately and give him that go from the off, so that he can fit in as quick as possible and see how it pans out. I do think we need to move some of the deadwood. Get other people onto those seats. Nakagami, please give Ayagura his ride. Let's see what the guy can do. They want to keep the Japanese flavor. So I think it is time to, and it's easy for us to say, we don't know the dynamics behind the scenes, but we're saying, let's freshen it up. We've already got that. The whole top tier has been shuffled. Let's see what we can do with the rest to, get the competitiveness back into it, because it seems like there are still 2 or 3 riders there because they are there. And, so I think that would be just an idea. But this Yamaha deal, I think it's going to work out well. I'm hoping 2027 Yamaha come with a revised engine, not just dropping down to an 800cc or 850, whatever, but come with whether they go for a V4, whatever, to put them in line with everyone else, so that we can kind of see what they can really achieve.
Yeah, of course, there's also
the different subject altogether.
No, sure, of course, no. There's so many subjects we could just have their own shows, really. There is obviously the talk of Toprak going to Honda. Now, for Honda, as a couple of people have mentioned here down the side with Yamahas and their ties with Monster, can Toprak fit into that? The same question was posed with Marc and Ducati with their Monster deal. We're gonna have to wait and see what happens there. But there's this talk of Toprak going into the HRC team. Now, if anyone needs help, it's Honda Racing Corporation in MotoGP. Marini has been an epic failure. Mir is still on the fence, although he might be their only option. Zarco's already signed up. Nakagami is a question mark. Ayagura is, Japan's next blue-eye boy. Put him in there. Does he want to go there? Last year he said, I'm not ready for MotoGP. I don't want to go. Kind of dodged a bullet there. Does he want to go there? So Toprak could be a good answer for Honda in terms of rider and in terms of sponsorship. Obviously, they've lost Repsol. Toprak comes with good money from Turkish government. Red Bull, Sofoglu pretty much owns Red Bull Turkey. So could it be a Red Bull Honda? There's a lot of factors to take into it. And I know, like Andre Calvert says, Toprak is special, but not podium in MotoGP. There seems to definitely be a divide, more leaning towards the fact, kind of like your comments, where Toprak is phenomenal and he's good, but, doesn't quite have the Pecco level, because the level's been raised so high now. Is it just raised a little bit too far for the likes of Toprak? I don't agree, but I can understand the argument. I really can, because I've spoken to Simon Crayfar about it before. That level between MotoGP and World Superbikes that used to be this is now this, and I understand that. I just think Toprak's got that something special. But, talking about Alex Rins, and you said the dead weight, a couple of people said, yeah, Rins has got the option to extend his contract. So I think the ball's really in his court. I watched him this weekend and he crashed and he got hurt again. And I do start wondering, is that the Rins story in MotoGP? Has he reached his height now, and the guy still limps around, and he crashes, he gets injured? Is that the Rins MotoGP story over now because he's just damaged goods in many ways? Can he be an asset as a development test rider in the background? Maybe, and that's why you say maybe going onto the Pramac bike. Listen, just develop, get results, make it work. I don't know. I don't know. I look at Pramac and I think it's great. You've gone Yamaha. But who are you going to get? Digi is your best option, which will be great. I'm sure VR46 would be going to Digi saying, listen, stay with us. We're getting factory bikes next year. Or potentially a GP25, which has just gone 30 seconds faster at Assen, Why? Yes, and Digi saying, I want to be a factory rider. A factory rider in Pramac colors riding in 10th, 12th place, or VR46, which in its own ways, in some ways, bigger than a factory title on a later spec Ducati, challenging at the front while the Bastianinis, the Mavericks get comfortable on KTMs and the Martins get, Digi could be climbing from the first race meeting next year, first 3, 4, 5 race meetings, podium. These are all the kind of stories that'll be painted to them by management and agents and stuff. And it's all going to, we have to just wait and see how it all plays out.
Yeah. And the Toprak to Honda story now, Rob, please believe me. And my mate James Dent will back me up on this. I'm a Honda man through and through. You cut me, I bleed red. And I can tell you now, I wouldn't want to see him go there, because you and I have discussed it. Too many riders' careers are cut short because of Honda, not because of their talent. And I wouldn't want Toprak to say, well, I've got a factory ride, I'm taking the opportunity, and it cuts his career short due to either because he's getting no results, a la Luca Marini, or he gets injured, a la Paul Espargaro, Lorenzo, so that to me, and as I said, Honda need a miracle, there's no doubt. But I don't want it to be at the cost of a rider like Toprak coming into the class and saying that that's a bit of a contradiction, because then why do I say, well, put Ayogura on the bike? I'm going to go back to what I think the grounding from Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP is an easier step up than World Superbikes to MotoGP, I believe. So, but I mean, time would show that, and his talent would shine through. But I don't know, that Honda at the moment just seems to, and Zarco said they've gone backwards, so what the problem is there, I don't know. To put a brand new, never ridden a MotoGP bike guy there, I don't know. Would it be a wise decision just to say, I'm in the factory team? Well, ask Luca Marini how that worked out.
Yeah, exactly. Deep Sea Diver Smith, he's got a couple of questions. Where does Aldeguer go? So Deep Sea, I think Aldeguer's move is pretty much hanging in on Digi. In fact, Aldeguer and Morbidelli. I think Aldeguer and Morbidelli are going to be the VR46 lineup for next year. I think Digi will go Pramac factory Yamaha supported team. So, Morbidelli, I know he came out this weekend saying, I still have a soft spot for Yamaha. I think that was just PR. I think, VR46 will take him out of that environment and put him into their camp, because that's what they're there for, to look after their VR46 riders. Aldeguer is a name that Rossi and VR46 have mentioned time and time again. Ducati have to put him somewhere. I think he'll fit in there. The second Cressini spot is still up for grabs. There's talk of Jack Miller and Manuel Gonzalez from Moto2. Again, in that situation, which one would I go for? Being somewhat of a Miller fan, I would say Miller. But as I just said, a couple of minutes ago, re-looking at the bigger picture, I would go Manuel Gonzalez all day. Right, come in, bring fresh ideas. There's no nothing. Fresh ideas. Jack Miller, I think, will go and find a nice home in World Superbikes with his wife, with his kid. Take that pressure off of the MotoGP spotlight and just go and enjoy your racing again in World Superbikes. I don't think he's enjoying. I don't see a rider that's enjoying himself. So I think that's the situation that potentially will play out. Other big news that just came out is, of course, Aleix Espargaro being signed as official HRC test rider. We knew it was going to happen. It was always coming. I think for him, it's going to be a big challenge. As he said, I'm looking forward to the new challenge. Well, it's a massive challenge, but a good signing for HRC. But you still have this problem of you don't have good enough riders on your actual race bikes come Sunday.
Yeah, Rob, but I think it's a step in the right direction. We discussed it at the end of last year. We said we discussed Stefan Bradl, and we said put someone on that Honda with no expectations as their race rider. And they did nothing. They moved a few staff around, but they kind of kept the status quo exactly the same. And when Bradl has raced, he's been way behind. He's been behind Lorenzo Savadori on the Aprilia as their test rider. So he's not cutting the mustard. Now they are bringing in Aleix. I don't know if they've mentioned whether he's going to be doing any wild card rides yet. I think they've just announced the signing. But even if he doesn't, they're now getting a rider who currently, barring all his injuries from Assen, is a top-tier rider. He's running top 5 consistently. He's in the mix. He knows the what's the right word? He knows what it takes to be riding at the front, what the bike needs to be doing. So I think he'll certainly, to me, it's a good signing because you and I mentioned it. And the same with Yamaha. Get a faster guy. Not that there's anything wrong with Cal Crutchlow. There's also been there, done that, not getting much riding done. So take a guy who's currently, Jack Miller as an example, who's fresh off the grid. They're in the mix of everything right now. And put them on as a test rider. For those next 2 years, you've got a guy whose brain is still racing. So I think for me, I think it's a very good signing. I hope Aleix can adapt and because he certainly led Aprilia forward by miles in the 4 or 5 years he was there. So yeah, possibly a very good signing. Obviously, again, time will tell and who they're going to put on the bike. Mir, I believe he needs to change his whole demeanor. He's still up in, I think the only reason he turned around and said, well, actually, I might resign is when Honda said, well, we're not going to resign you. Then suddenly he realized, well, if I don't take this deal, like he said, his stock has dropped from when he was world champion. Now he's at the bottom of the food chain again. So possibly that could be his thinking. But if he's going to stick there, he needs to give it a good go, really commit, which I'm not saying he hasn't, but his riding certainly hasn't shown that.
Yeah, the problem for the like of Mir and Oliveira is, and Deep Sea I was asking about Oliveira, is there's too many riders and not enough seats for next year. So all these guys, we've got to start really thinking about it. Someone asked about Brad's contract. He's with the team next year. Definitely 100% confirmed. Yeah, hi Rob, does Brad have a contract for next year or later on? What about Brad on a Ducati? So Nico, he definitely is signed with the factory team for next year. Following that, I think it's up for debate whether he stays with the team or potentially looks for a move elsewhere, whether KTM want to keep him or not. Definitely been a bit more of an open conversation around Brad with Pit Bara and KTM, and that is, and like I said, there's going to be more pressure coming for Brad next year with this kind of elite team that they've got going. The worst rider in that team, the fourth rider in that team, at the end of in the championships, is going to have a hard time keeping that spot. So I have no doubt, I have full faith that Brad won't be that fourth rider. We'll talk about Brad a little bit later on, but for now, Brad certainly is secured. Paul, I think let's move on because we've got a lot to talk about the racing that happened this weekend, and Mariska Hutchinson brings up a very good point. When we are done speculating, can we talk about the mind games and messing around during qualifying? It was so frustrating to watch. Now, I don't know if you caught it, Paul, because you were, like me, were on the road and busy. So I did manage to catch it, though, and it was this Moto 3 of old days. You don't even see Moto 3 riders doing it anymore. These MotoGP riders just cruising around the racetrack. Martin got a penalty for it. Marc Marquez was cruising around. Pecco was in the pits laughing at all these guys because he had gone out and put a stupid fast time in. No one was going to catch him. But I do look at that and go, if you're going to be giving Maverick Vinales penalties for touching the green by this much, exactly. And Brad touching the green by this much last year, and this guy doing and you're going to let these guys cruise around, and there's this tire pressure rule, and there's so many of these factors and restraints and these rules, these stupid rules, and then a massive rule like you're riding around slowly on a racetrack, and gets no penalties. Just amazes me. It was pathetic to see. I hate it when I see that. I want to climb in that TV and headbutt everyone. And then when a Marc Marquez crashes or someone crashes, they go, "But why? Listen, I'm not a Michelin technician or anything." It's common sense to everyone in MotoGP now from the outside. Those tires are temperamental. They have to be at a certain temperature. So when you ride around like a fool, you're going to lose temperature in your tire and you're going to crash. So yeah, it was. I agree with Mariska. It was stupid to see from what's supposed to be the mature, grown-up category of motorcycle racing, and it wasn't.
Yeah, and Rob, it's dangerous because some guy on a flying lap, and I didn't see Saturday's Q1 or Q2, so I'm not commenting on what happened there. Obviously, Martin got a 3-grid penalty. Oh, big deal. But some guy on a flying lap going through a right-hand corner that switches into a left, he cannot see what's happening on the left-hand side. His focus is, ahead of him, and in the turn, we see how they lean off the bike. So there's more that element of danger. Someone could get severely injured. So they need to address it, and they need to address it not in a 3-grid penalty. If there is a penalty, like we say, you touch the green by 3 millimeters and you're in trouble. But there's no risk. There's no one's in any danger. But here, riders can end up in a situation where it could go a bit pear-shaped. We've discussed it too. And I remember back in the day with proper World Superbike Superpole, it was the most exciting thing. You had your warm-up lap, you had your flying lap, and that was it. I can remember Pier Francesco Keeley dumping it at the top of West Bank. That's your lap done, So maybe it's not going to happen, but that would be the answer, because then it rids everyone of this following and this guy doing this and this one doing that. But I don't know. They need to address it. It's a danger, if nothing else.
Just amazes me. I mean, I remember Darren Binder in Moto3 and other Moto3 riders getting, starting from pit lane penalties and everything. 3-place grid penalty for anyway, we could talk about that all day, but it was something that a couple of people and Mariska brought up, and it was a note that I made. It was just something that left a bad taste in my mouth over the weekend, But talking of the weekend, this phenomenon that is Pecco Bagnaia. I mean, when the guy does what he did this weekend on that bike, he's untouchable. I mean, pretty much Martin, everyone came out and went, you can't touch this guy. 30 seconds faster in that Sunday race compared to last year. Robin Kenwood, tire pressure, what's it supposed to actually be, front or rear? So Robin, we'll talk about the tire pressure just now when we get on Marc Marquez. But I watched this Pecco Bagnaia that was just dominant. He loves the Assen track. Yes, we know that. Ducati have built that GP24 machine for Pecco Bagnaia. It's Pecco's bike that lends itself to some other riders as well, because they still perform. But man, when Pecco's in that mood, how do you stop the guy? And it seems to be this theme with Pecco Bagnaia. Starts the seasons off slowly. When I say slowly, starts them off fast with good pace, but he has these crashes and he sort of gets it out of his way, and then he just finds this rhythm that no one can keep up with. And Martin's doing his best, clawing onto it with dear life, but Pecco does, certainly after this weekend, although MotoGP changes from weekend to weekend, but after that weekend, you look at that force that is Pecco Bagnaia and go, that's why he's a 2-time world champion. That's why he's still the favorite to win, and that's why Ducati actually couldn't care less if they lost Martin or whoever. They've got Pecco. As long as they've got Pecco, they're happy.
Yeah, Rob, and every week he just seems to get better and better and better and better. And I mean, it's not like he's coming from a low base of 10th in the championship. He's the lead rider. And yes, sure, he's not leading the championship. Like you said, a little bit of a slow start in terms of results, not in terms of speed. But now that he's found his groove, when something clicks with that guy, I mean, look at him. He led every practice, every race lap, sprint and race at Mugello, and exactly the same this weekend. Once he gets a good start, and his starts are dynamic, it's not like he drops down to 3rd, 4th, 5th. He gets the whole shot and he's gone, and then he controls the pace. I know at one stage on Sunday in the race, he had a 2-second, it had just gone over 2 seconds gap on Martin. And suddenly Martin closed 2.5 tenths of a second, and the commentators were like, oh, here comes Martin. Pecco just upped the pace the next lap. So he took a 1-lap breather. And when they show his laps, I mean, I don't know what I can't remember, 131s. Every lap besides the first lap, which is a standing start, to the last lap, 131.2 to 131.7. Rob, you've raced at a high level. You know what it takes to do 28 laps at exactly the same pace. And it's not like he's running it in a fun rider's pace. He's setting lap record pace. As we said, 30 seconds a lap faster. That's a second a lap. over the 28 and a bit laps or whatever. That's just incredible. And he doesn't look out of shape. You're no longer watching that little square when they're not showing him. You're like, oh, there he goes. We'd actually like to see him run off or do something. Just not happening.
It's just a scary story of how Pecco, the combination of Pecco and Ducati, we sometimes just talk about Ducati raising the bar, and we often we mention Pecco every now and then, but I think it's very much a case of Pecco and Ducati lifting this bar. Ducati, Pecco's their blue-eyed boy. They are building this bike for him. They are using other information. Pecco's got this wonderful asset to be able to, when the bike's not feeling that great for me, what's Marc doing? What's Anaya doing? What's Martin doing? He's just got the world at his feet, basically. But he puts it all together. And mentally, what impresses me the most about Pecco, and I've spoken about it before, he never looks phased. Even when he has his moments and he's crashed, he shows a little bit of frustration. He seems to gather it all up. You put him in front of the mic. He's either, it was my fault, I accept it, or I didn't feel, something went wrong and we must fix the problem. But he's very professional in everything he does. And he doesn't have these outbursts towards his team and that kind of thing that we've seen from other riders. He just looks unbeatable. He just looks like you can't get under his skin. Very much, bred from that VR46 kind of DNA. It's almost like he's just come straight from the VR46's, Baghdad. He really is just an extension of what Rossi was, but the modern day version. And I watched that this weekend, and whether you're a fan or not, you can't help but look at it and go, my God, that is just the thing. Jenny Blake Robert, the 23 Ducati doesn't turn or accelerate out of the corner as well as the 24. Jenny, I 100% agree with you, and that has been Bezzecchi's biggest problem is the turning capability on the front end of that Ducati. It was something that Pecco complained about at the beginning of last year. I think it's something that Marc is starting to realize is probably the biggest handicap now for him. He knows the bike. There's nothing more for Marc to learn on the Ducati. But there certainly is a little bit of a difference between the old spec and the new spec. Last year, we saw the old spec still being a lot more competitive. They have been this year. But as the weekends go by, the Martin and the Pecco's new bikes are just creeping away from the rest of the field, which is, a little bit later on, we'll talk about a certain Frankie Morbidelli who's just not doing it for me. So anyway, fantastic weekend from Pecco Bagnaia. Certainly the man to beat at the moment. Martin clawing on. Martin, another solid weekend. Listen, he was riding out of his skin to keep up with that pace of Pecco Bagnaia. He only ended 3.6 seconds behind, which means he was 27 seconds faster than his time last year. But I think the biggest motivation for Martin at the moment is to take that number one plate away from Pecco and mainly Ducati, who of course has snubbed him, and of course the prestige of being MotoGP World Champion.
Oh, absolutely. Just on Martin, he's been solid. He's been consistent. But and it happens to everyone. Back in the day when you came up against Mick Doohan, no matter how good you were, he was a little bit better. And the same with Rossi, and the same with Marquez in the first 6 years of his career. And now I think anyone racing today is up against this phenomenon, Pecco Bagnaia, who just deals with everything. And I don't think Martin has got to a point yet where he's starting to panic, but it's certainly getting to a point where he's going to have to think how he's going to beat him. Because he's, inch by inch, he's clawed back that gap on the points table, and that's what they look at. Martin, I've been impressed with him. He hasn't tossed the bike away. He's looked fast. He's just up against a rider who is, he's just doesn't seem to put a foot wrong. And as you say, it is Pecco and Ducati, or Ducati and Pecco, maybe less so Ducati and Jorge Martin, maybe less so, I don't know. But going back to what we had discussed once, we knew that things were starting to change. And even when we were surmising, where's Martin going to go? Will he go to the factory? Will he stay at Pramac? People the conspiracy theorists are saying, well, Ducati will stop giving him X, Y, and Z. The way Pecco's going, Ducati can give Martin whatever he wants, and it ain't going to make a difference.
No, absolutely true. Frank Castello says here, he's talking about Ducati choosing Marc and losing Pramac and Martin and the Beast. Question is Marc worth it? Frank, only time will tell. It all depends. We all know the talent that is Marc. Ducati signed an 8-time world champion. I don't think they signed a rider currently on form or whatever. They signed an 8-time world champion. I think Martin, and I went on record, and I'll go on record again. I think Martin dug his own hole there in many ways. I think he was too outspoken for Ducati. Ducati have always been, it's our way or no way. They don't like riders going up against them. So anyway, time will tell to see how the Marc Marquez factory Ducati exercise works. And if it doesn't, then yes, absolutely. They've lost Pramac, Martin, and Enea Bastianini to sign on Marc Marquez. Speaking of Enea Bastianini, Paul, he was in third. Again, another solid weekend, but I think we're going to see more and better results from Bastianini now that the contract's sorted. We saw him back in his Cressini days. When this contract's up in the air, it seems to kind of get in the way of him a little bit. That's all sorted now, and now we're seeing his performances as he did at Mugello, back on the podium. Great, loving life. He's got to break this habit of coming good towards the end of races. The pace is too fast. Pecco's taken the pace too fast, too early on for these comeback rides. I think it'll be a long time before we see a real comeback ride a la Bastianini as we've seen in the past before, because of that 30-second kind of. But we're seeing it every single racetrack we go to. Yes, Assen was the most at 30 seconds. And what's most impressive about Assen is how short the track is, and they still went 30 seconds faster. But we're on average between 10 and 15 seconds per race weekend that we go to. So this Bastianini recovery rides is great, but it's almost like third's going to be your best position if you don't sort out a bit more in qualifying, and certainly a bit more at the start of races, full tank of fuel and new tires.
Yeah, well, that's obviously his problem. And he did say afterwards that qualifying is his issue. But he's got to sort that out, because he can't keep saying, oh, but look at me, I'm the fastest guy in the last third of a race or the last quarter of a race. Like you say, Rob, if he's coming from 15 seconds behind and only finishing 8 seconds behind, well, whoopee, he's still 8 seconds behind. So whatever his issue is at the start of the race, be it on a full tank, be it getting the tires up to temperature, lack of confidence, maybe while he's got both that tires not up to temperature, the extra weight of the bike running the full fuel load. Unfortunately, that excuse, and I'm not saying it is his excuse, but that doesn't cut it anymore, because the Martins, the Bagnaias, the Marc Marquezes, the Gian Antonio, or no, not so much to that point either, but the front three are away after 4 laps, Now, to be making up ground at the end of the race is almost impossible. And like you say, 2 years ago, it worked for Bastianini. He could come from way back, better tire management, but the whole dynamic of MotoGP doesn't fit that role anymore. So he's certainly going to have to, whatever changes need to be made. And I think that's the advantage of being on a Ducati. He can look at the data and say, okay, the first third of the race, when the bike does have more weight, when the tires are coming up to temperature, this is what Pecco's doing, or this is what Martini's doing. And I think it'll benefit him, but he needs to. It's also a change in his head that he can't keep thinking, well, I'll catch them. I'm going to catch Marc. I'm going to catch this guy. By then the front 2 or 3 are gone. So he needs to up his first 5 lap pace. He's qualifying, first of all. Then the first 5 laps of the race. Then I think he's going to be a danger. He's too late, I believe, to win this championship. He's too far behind. But certainly he can be a big fly in the ointment for both Bagnaia and Martin.
So Wayne Taylor's bringing up a very good conversation, which was going to bring me to my next point after we had discussed the top 3 and kind of bringing Bastianini into it. Maybe KTM launch device will help him next year with Bastianini, which it might. But and then Brian Ritchie talking about tire preservation. Yeah, Bastianini's the best at it. Before we get into that, Andre Calvert, Marc signing is not for results; it's for sales. I agree with you to a point. I think both go hand in hand in many ways, but yes, Marc's going to sell Ducati more shirts and stuff than Martin would. Getting back to this now, when Brad came in, one of the qualities of Brad and the KTM in many ways was, one of their handicaps was early race pace, heavy fuel tank, new tires. But one of their qualities was mid-race and end race, they seemed to maintain their tires. Now, this also got me thinking over the weekend we haven't seen this happen from Brad. He seems to have lost that ability to be able to make up time in mid and towards the end of races. We saw it at Assen again now. He just kind of maintained or just couldn't keep up with the pace. It's as simple as that. That's where they are, and we'll dive into it a little bit more. And this could be playing into what Bastianini and why Bastianini can't get going at the beginning of races, and it's this tire pressure rule. Now we saw for the first time, it was open for everyone to see how this actually works out, because Marc Marquez is literally sitting up to let someone else go in front of him in hope that the heat of the bike will up his front tire pressure. Now, there's two ways teams are playing this now. First is you run it really low at that ideal temperature, that low temperature, more contact patch, more tire on the ground. That's ideally what they want. The tire pressure rule has been brought in because Michelin were not happy from a safety point of view that the teams were running these tire pressures very, very low. And it was kind of out of their control. They are saying the ideal temperature is this, and that's why they've put this level playing field. But now teams can do one of two things. Either go very low, start low and get those good early laps in, hoping that at some point it'll come up, because you can only run so much of the race distance under a certain tire pressure. Marc had obviously reached that point on his dash, as Simon Crafos said, comes up with a note and says, listen, you're coming very close. You've got to get that tire pressure up. Marc looks behind him, says, DG, right, I don't have the pace to go with Martin and Pecco, so I've got to re-strategize. Right, DG, you go. I'm going to ride right up your ass, get that heat on my front tire. I need this tire pressure to go up. Otherwise, I'm going to get a penalty. Marc came out afterwards and said he got punted by Bastianini. That kind of, pulled the tire down. They took a risk and they got nailed for it. Rules are rules. And he got his, whatever, 10-second penalty or whatever, and he went down to 10th place. Okay. Then there's the other side of it that you run. Right, let's be cautious here. I don't want to get any penalties. Let's run it, ideally where Michelin are telling us the downside to that is it's going to spike if I'm in a group and I'm going to get a lot of chatter and I'm going to lose feel. Now, is that, and then you get the Pecco Bagnaia and the Martins who just seem to get it perfect. Whatever tire pressure they run, it just works. And there's no bad place for them. Now, is it a case of Bastianini going one of those ways? And that's why at the start of the race, he's not fast, because he's running it at the optimum temperature. So he's dealing with a harder tire pressure at the start of the race, and he just doesn't have the pace. And then as the race goes on, he's able to manage it and get it better. Or the other way, he's running it low and waiting for it to come up before he attacks. Or I don't know. But since that tire pressure rule came in, and this is what got me thinking about Brad and KTM and not having this asset of having the mid-race and late race pace again, that seems to have dented KTM the most, that tire pressure. We know with the WP suspension and Öhlins, we can have that argument for days, but we know KTM's front end is not as agile and versatile as Ducatis and Aprilias and that. They just don't have their whole demeanor is a bit more rigid, a bit more one-directional. Now, has this really kicked them in the nuts of, right, you can't run your nice low tire pressure that you want to be able to make that bike work. You've got to run it here. And that's taken the superpower, or certainly part of the superpower that helped KTM or benefited KTM. It's taken them away, because certainly if you put a timeline on it, since they've really got strict with this rule, what's happened to Brad certainly and KTM certainly since that's happened. So this tire pressure rule, man, it's such a divide, and it's such a big gray area.
Yeah, and we discussed it at the end of last year, because the riders still had get out of jail free cards. Remember, they could have one warning and then a second time. Now, no warnings. We discussed it. I think what's happening to MotoGP is the rules are starting to kill the racing. And I understand safety is paramount. We don't want anyone getting hurt unnecessarily. But are Michelin not being overly cautious on this? I don't know. Surely, to me, should be a rider's decision. And I understand the tire is a man-made product and things can go wrong. When was the last time we saw a MotoGP tire delaminate? Yes, I remember there was, I think it was at Phillip Island, but I can't remember where they had to. Remember, Marquez could only do, all of them could only run 8 laps or whatever, and he ran 1 lap. But that's going back to probably 2016. And I can't even remember. They might even have been on Bridgestones then. So my point is, these tires are well made. I understand Michelin, the last thing they want is for a rider to get hurt because a tire delaminates. But are they not making that window too small? So now, if what you say is correct, and I'm agreeing with your thinking, it's affected the KTMs. So you've taken a player out of the mix who should have been there, even if it was the last third or half of a race where they could still maintain the same pace. The question then is, the info from Michelin, is that available to anyone to see? I'm going to say no, but teams can see. But then do Ducati, why are they not saying to Marc, listen, Pecco's starting the race at 1.623 and you starting at 1.621? That's the difference. I don't know. But clearly, me personally, this rule spoils MotoGP. And just to correct you, Rob, a 16-second penalty. Now, that's ridiculous. For being 0.001 of a bar under temperature. And he explained to them, which, Mark, one thing you've got to give him credit for. When I punched him off the track and Bastianini didn't punch him off, racing instead, he never whinges. And even with this, he said, the rules are the rules. But to me, the rules are going to be killing the racing. And if this is correct, and we don't really know, is that what's limiting Brad? Is it what's limiting Bastianini at the start of a race? Yeah, then the rules are killing the sport, So yeah, it's a contentious one. We have discussed it in the past, and I think MotoGP. So what Marquez said is we need to look at this, where a rider, through no fault of his own, so you run wide at a turn, you're now out of the heat from another bike. He says the temperature drops so quickly, and it takes 2 laps at pace to get it back up to temperature. Is that right? I don't know. It's such a, to me, this is a real gray area of MotoGP where, it's just, I think it's going to kill the sport, because whether you're a Marquez fan or not, you get to the end and he had finished 6th in the race, not his best result. And then you go and look later on your social media, but now he's in 10th. What happened? I don't think, me personally, a guy falls off like Pedro Acosta, he made the mistake. Everyone can see it and, oh, my God crashed. Sorry. This rule, to me, it happens 4 hours after the racing. I just don't like it at all. Rules for the sake of rules.
It is confusing for me, because in many ways it's back to that, right? Whoever gets the maths right in the pits can win. It's not rider feel. It's taking away from the riders. So I agree with you. Roger Wellard asks a good question. Does the tire pressure rule apply for free practice? Now, it's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to it. But my only thinking is, well, even if it didn't, what's the point of doing it other than going for a fast lap time, which is fine, getting into queue, whatever. But then it's not helping your setup for the main race. You've surely got to set your bike up at whatever that optimum tire pressure is that Michelin's giving you to go. But I don't know if you know the answer to that, or anyone in the comments knows the answer to.
That's a very good question, because all we ever hear is that for the sprint race it can be 60% of the thing, and for the main race it's going to be 75% or whatever. But no one's ever mentioned that. So, because then in theory, what you were highlighting earlier, you could run your tire at the optimum low temperature for 2 laps, but you might be way below what the recommended pressure is. Now, is that a safety issue? If that's the thinking behind this rule, which I have an idea it is. Somewhere I'm sure I read a thing saying it's a safety issue from Michelin. So, yeah, that's a very good question. I think we need to find out about that. I'm sure Wayne Taylor will know.
Yeah, so Wayne actually brings up a good point here as well, Rob. If you look at the timeline, as soon as KTM changed to carbon frame, they lost that race pace. Wayne, to me, it just seems like a combination of things. Yes, the carbon frame. I think the tire pressure plays a huge factor. I think, like Brad, if I look at Brad and Pedro potentially on Sunday as well, were kind of riding by themselves, or generally they're going to get more heat from riders in front because they're not going to be leading races. They're going to kind of be in that pack. But, are they setting their tire pressure to be safe? And then when you're riding around by yourself, yeah, it's not going up, but it's certainly not coming down either, so you're left with this tire pressure that's not ideal for you. You want more of this or you want more of that. So I don't know. Ansley Twigger brings in a good point here, and it's exactly kind of what I was talking to you about before we came on air, just to end off with the Brad Binder before we move on to anyone else. I watched Brad this weekend. He is better than the bike and still a top 4 quality rider. I have judged him for not riding defensive enough and not being aggressive enough for overtakes. Not his fault. He has no confidence in the front end, as does the rest of the KTM squad. He is bringing valuable info by staying sunny side up no matter the result. Brad is a fighter. He deserves a faster package. Now, we in some ways have been a little bit critical of Brad and KTM over the last couple of weeks, and because we want our boy to do better. Fanboy cap on, we're behind you, but come on, we want more. There's more to Brad than this, and we know this. And again, exactly what Ansley's mentioning here. I watched this weekend. I watched a rider not risking himself to defend positions. I did see him. Brad's been overtaken on the last lap last year by Aleix in that final chicane. Closed the line. He got past turn one. And Brad's one of the latest breakers in MotoGP. But I saw him be passed this weekend, not giving it up easily by any means, but he was overtaken with a little bit less fight than I've seen in previous years. And exactly what Ansley's saying. I saw Brad Binder this weekend going, the bike's not there. If I override this bike, I'm going to do a Pedro Acosta. And it must have been frustrating for him to see a Pedro in front of him, on the Sunday race. And he's going, well, if I push any harder, I think I'm going to crash this motorbike. I've had crashes now lately. I can't keep doing this. But Barra came out and said, oh, we're a bit concerned about these crashes and whatever. What's the point? What's the point of me risking when I'm in a lonely 7th place or whatever it was? There's no more. What's the point? I saw a rider this weekend that was riding within the capabilities of the bike, not his. I agree with Ansley. I still think Brad is a top 4, top 3 MotoGP rider all day long. But if you're not on the machinery, don't push it. And again, exactly what Ansley said. I didn't see a rider that was confident in the front. I think when Pedro went down, I'm sure Brad looked at it and went, well, if I'd carried on riding the way Pedro was, that would have been me. And that's why I am behind Pedro. And Pedro can make these mistakes. He's the rookie and he's sublime no matter what. But when Brad brings it home in this, it's not good enough and whatever. And we all, I was a little bit critical about Brad. We need more. But then I looked at it this weekend and I went, you know what? Hats off, Brad. The project's not there. I know you're working as hard as you can, and you'll read us some information now that James has sent you. And you've spoken to Brad recently there in South Africa. But the package is not there. What is the point of going out there and doing a Pedro Acosta? For Pedro, it's fine. No one cares. No one gives. But for Brad, who's made all these mistakes already so far, Brad's got to go, right, I know I'm not going to win the championship, but I certainly have to still think about the championship, because if I don't, and I keep landing on my head, I could be in 9th to 10th position in this World Championship. At least if I go like this, where I'm bringing the bike home in 6th, yes, Marc got a penalty and that helped him or whatever, but I'm picking up 6. I'm picking up championship points. By the end of the year, I could finish 5th and 6th. Now, on my CV, that looks a hell of a lot better than 9th or 10th. So Brad's biggest, I would say, goal now for the rest of this year is just beat Pedro Acosta in the championship. That to me has got to be his biggest kind of goal, and to obviously get the package going. But I don't know how you saw it, but exactly what Ansley said is how I kind of took my foot off the Brad Binder pressure pedal a little bit, because I put myself in his shoes and I saw him riding that way and I went, okay, hang on, I haven't looked at it like this. And certainly with information and after you speaking to him, I'm sure you also have a bit more clarity on it.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So first of all, I met Brad the Thursday last week before they flew back on the Monday back to Europe. And he said he was very positive, to be quite honest. But that's Brad's demeanor. He's a very positive. He didn't say, this. He said, no, the bike is good. We've got a good package, but at the moment it's limited. We cannot do what the Ducati can do. So he said, what I'm going to do now when I go back, I'm going to ride this bike as hard as I can ride it. So I think that goes to what you're saying, where as hard as he can ride it within the limits of the bike, not within the limits of Brad Binder. And he's very positive. And some people might have expected him to kind of be a bit, yes, this season's not panning out. I'm not happy. He was, no, we're happy. Things are going in the right direction. And then I got a message from, as you mentioned, James. This is from one of his technicians on his team. So he's replying to a message from James. He says, hello, my buddy. Here's the small update for you. Brad is getting the maximum out of the bike, and we are also faster than last year. We know that. For example, Brad was 16 seconds faster than 2023, which is a decent step. But unfortunately, Bagnaia was 30 seconds faster. That means Ducati has made double the step that we have made, but we never give up. Now, that's from Brad's technician on his bike, not some oak walking around like a me, having a look and surmising. This is inside info. So they understand, they believe their project is good. But when the Ducati happens to be, I'm going to say twice as good, it's not. But they've made that big step forward. So, things like you say, Rob, we don't know the other things, the tire pressures. You and I have discussed it, and lots of people have agreed with us. We think part of the limiting factor is the suspension. They've got to deal with that because that's their choice. But certainly, I think Brad has taken that mindset that maybe just this weekend to get back into the racing, that he's going to ride the bike to the bike's capabilities, not to his capabilities. And Pedro Acosta rode to his capabilities, and he ended up crashing. So, it is a double-edged sword for these guys.
It's one line or the other. There's no middle ground for MotoGP riders anymore. You're either hero or you're zero. It's as simple as that. Wayne Taylor says,
And for people who watch the race but don't look at the intricacies, for Brad to have been 15 seconds faster, as we mentioned earlier, that's half a second a lap faster. Now look at the qualifying. I think generally, as a rule, the top 15 are covered by less than a second. So now you're going every lap for 28 laps, half a second faster than you did last year. That's a massive step forward. So, the progress is there. It's just one team is progressing at a better, faster, different rate.
Yeah, Wayne Taylor says exactly what you kind of mentioned right at the end of your conversation. They're saying that looked like Brad came into this weekend going, right, I've got to ride to the capabilities of this bike, because if I override, I'm losing points. I'm not getting any data with this bike in the gravel. I've got to kind of, it's not who Brad is. Brad's not a crasher. And Wayne Taylor said, he mentioned twice that he hadn't crashed the whole weekend. So clearly that's playing on his mind. And another thing, we had Sven Grunner at the race meeting there for us on behalf of Motor Rider World. And he was saying, listening to Brad's debriefs and talking to Bjorn, and he didn't get to speak to Brad really, but talking to Darren, certainly in Moto 2 as well. WP, certainly from Darren's side, the WP suspension certainly is the handicap. Darren's just not gelling with the WP. He's not happy with it. They can't find the balance to it all. But Sven saying, Stanley, and Sven, is a South African ZX10 Masters Cup champion, could ride a motorbike, and he pulls things apart and he really dissects into things. And he just said, standing on the side of the track, and I saw it last year when I was at Assen, you get very good vantage points at Assen. The KTM change of direction is where it suffers the most. Now, you think of Assen, how many times you are changing direction, especially at pace. You are doing it a lot. And KTM just weren't there. Where did Pedro Acosta crash? Where you literally go from this fast right, change of direction to left, and down you go. That front, and I saw it with the bits and pieces that we saw in over the whole weekend of Brad. The KTM front just seems to sit up. It seems to float a lot more. If I look at a lot of the pictures of Brad coming out of the turns and changing direction, the Ducati's front is planted. The suspension is compressed. The KTM's seems to be up right at the top end of the stroke, and that front wheel is just floating. So there's definitely a problem with the front end of the KTM, whether it's the tire pressure, whether it's the carbon chassis, whether it's the WP suspension. Although, as I said the last time we had a show, WP being in Moto 2 now has kind of just highlighted in many ways that WP is the problem, because Jake Dixon won Assen Moto 2 last year. Put in a good effort. I think he was 4th or 5th. You look at some of those Moto 2 riders on WP suspension, how that it's just kicked them in the teeth. And that's what Brad and KTM in MotoGP have been dealing with for how many years now? So it's got to be that limiting factor.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Rob, and once again, we're guessing, but I think we're pretty much on the money. But that's not going to change, because it seems like KTM are set on this WP suspension because it's their brand. And, it sounds like they're just going to continue with this and see where it takes them. We've discussed it. I would be of the mindset that, swallow your pride, do what everyone else does, and see how it works out. You can always go back to WP if you find that that's not the issue. But I guess that's the easy way out. And for us as fans, it's we're still surmising, and it's just do that. But for KTM, it's more than just that. It's a brand. So there's bigger things involved. But yeah, I think we're kind of very close to the money, if not on the money when it comes to that.
And I think it's a couple of people I've spoken to inside the paddock, outside the paddock, and Brad, I'm sure, will tell you himself. You touched upon it when you were speaking to him. As positive as he is, him and KTM's biggest problem is they've got this Martin and Pecco, and their rivalry on the best bike in the paddock is just taking it to a point. I do feel sorry for KTM in many ways, because at the beginning of the year, Qatar, we all saw that. Brad was right on there, right on the pace, and then while they're taking one step at a time, Ducati are just taking leaps and leaps and leaps. So every time they think they've closed it, and this is where, again, I put myself in Brad Binder's position. It must be the most frustrating thing in the world. And the fact that Brad is able to keep himself sane and sit in Benoni there at a go-kart track listening to you and still be positive and energetic about it. Like I said, if you look at the likes of Maverick that are quite happy to throw the team and the bike under the bus, and other riders that we've seen before him, and Brad's still staying as loyal and as positive as possible. That's why we are Brad Binder fanboys.
Yeah, and absolutely, Rob. That just shows the character of the man. He just doesn't give up and say, "Oh, well, to hell with this," and I should have signed with Ducati and I would have been world. He's put his paw print on the paper, and he's sticking to his guns, and he believes in the project, and he's giving it 100%. And he believes that they're giving it 100%. And he has his crew chief backing it up, saying, listen, we think we're doing well, and it just so happens we're hitting a team that are and let's face it, at the moment Ducati are a bit of a phenomenon in motor racing, where they just don't seem to be able to put a foot wrong, and they've got two of the fastest riders on their bike. So their whole, and as we've discussed, it didn't just happen. It's been a 12-year project. It's now come to fruition, and they're benefiting. So yeah, it makes it difficult for everybody else. And we're just concentrating now on KTM. Imagine how Honda and Yamaha are feeling. I mean, that's who have 100 times more world championships, and they don't even see, they're almost getting lapped. I mean, it's unbelievable what Ducati are doing at the moment.
Kennedy Racing, welcome. If you've just joined us, I see you've put in some good comments here about Ducati with only 3 factory bikes for next year, 1 going to VR46, and that we have spoken about that earlier on in the show. But thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel. Make sure if you're on YouTube, just hit that like and subscribe button to help us out a little bit there. Quickly, before I go into, I was going to talk about Sachsenring, but to end off on Assen, you brought up the Hondas there. This is where they are. So Sean Mir crashes out again. Cool, yay! That's what happens. Nakagami and Luca Marini, and it's horrible to laugh, but I can't believe it. Laugh. I cannot believe where HRC are. Luca Marini runs off early on, comes back on track, and off he goes, and he finishes last by miles. So what does he finish? Last by 70
seconds.
70.9 seconds. Okay, Nakagami 46 seconds. Miguel Oliveira in 15th, who picks up the last championship points, which Marini hasn't come close to this year.
Yeah.
Gets a long lap penalty, cocks up the long lap penalty, goes one straight, gets another long lap penalty, does his second long lap penalty, and still destroys Marini and Nakagami. He beats Nakagami by 2 seconds and Marini by 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw a banner of, right, we need help, like Honda. But how we spoke, we a quick little dissection of this. Surely management has to change now. Surely in professional sport, football, anywhere, rugby, anywhere, when a team is doing this rubbish and you've had half a season and Marini hasn't made one bit of an impression, one bit of anything, Jean Mir has developed nothing other than a bad attitude. Surely you've got to start changing management. Surely Puig is not the man for this job. Santi is just sitting there getting his paycheck, and that's a conversation we'll have after this. But for goodness sake, something. Forget riders. Forget who you're going to bring in. Start at management level and what's being done there.
Rob, we've discussed it about the riders. There's not a queue of them outside Honda's door knocking to get in. Maybe it's the same thing with management. Possibly they can't get anyone. Maybe, we did mention Livio Supo. There seems to be no talk around him again. He might have been a good one because he was good when he ran the Honda team. But other than that, they're going to have to, I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to have to look out of MotoGP, because I don't think anyone in their right mind in the MotoGP paddock is going to give up a position a la a Pramac guy or a Grassini and say, well, I'll go and run this thing. Because no doubt, when you take over that position, you have minimum 1, but probably 2 years of absolute pain. And are you prepared to do that? So I'm not too sure if there's a queue of people. So maybe that's why Puch is still there. And me personally, I was very surprised he had a job from the end of last year to this year when they made those changes. I really thought his head would be on the chopping block. But possibly there's no other solution. Who do they pull in? I couldn't think of anyone. Davide Brivio, which we discussed last year before he came to Trackhouse, would have been the perfect guy. He definitely knows how to gel a team. We're seeing that Raul Fernandez has just got better and better and better. Oliveira may be a different story, but the team as a whole, I think, is better off by having Brivio. You can't say the same about Honda. You can't say that. So I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they need to pull Cecchinello out of his position of running a team and put him in that spot, because he understands MotoGP. But then what happens to his team? Is he prepared to sacrifice his position in the team? I don't know. Is that a possibility? But other than that, to me, I would think it's the same as the rider standing. You got no one knocking on the door to do that job.
Unless you're Toprak Razgatlioglu and you just think, well, my only way into MotoGP is through Honda. They'll offer me a big salary. Why not? Especially if I go win the World Superbike Championship on a BMW. What more have I got to achieve there? I'm possibly got to go up against some Foster riders, or even Foster riders next year. So why not go to MotoGP on Honda? Because get a little bit of a taste for it, because in a couple of years' time, it's going to all new rules and it could be a different picture for me. So that's an argument we can go on for days. Ronald from Germany, from Hamburg, thank you so much for joining us. Brian Ritchie, we know you from Hanau in Germany. Speaking of Germany, we're going to Sachsenring next, so we'll talk about that now. Mariska Hutchinson, I seriously don't understand how they give another penalty if it clearly cost him more time. It is a bit of a weird one. It is a bit of a weird one. Listen, you've cocked up. You added 20 seconds onto what should have been 2 seconds. Don't give him another penalty. But on the other hand, you're a grown man, and if we told you to ride through this little thing, just ride through the little thing, don't be a...
Yeah, Rob, but also in all fairness, that little thing doesn't get used very often. So how dusty is it? How cooler is it? There's no rubber there to give you, now your mind is in race mode. And I agree with Marissa that if you've cocked up as badly as that, just give the guy a break. Listen, but just stick to the racetrack. It's safer, So yeah, I agree with that. But so there's that dynamic that they, I understand they don't want him to go in there and give it horns. You stick between the lines and do what you have to. But dust, cooler track, no rubber on the track, so it could have been a little bit, but it certainly caught him unawares. Certainly. Yeah, I mean, he really looked like a plonker paddling his way through the gravel track. But yeah, your point is very valid that he does that and he beats the consistent Luca Marini by over 30 seconds. Marini's the most consistent rider. He hasn't scored a point in any sprint or any race. Well, you've got to really work hard to do that.
It's madness. It's absolute madness. Ollie Motor and Nicholas Hrobler agreeing with me on the Toprak Razgatlioglu thing. So love you guys. Well done. Germany. Paul, Germany is up next, and we've got our German viewers here. Hopefully, Brian, you're going to be going to the race. Ronald, you're going to be going to Sachsenring. We know Sachsenring, there's a king of the ring there, and that's a Marc Marquez. Now, we're talking about the fact that has he lit us up as much as we thought, as much as the world thought he was? He was going to climb on a Ducati and destroy everyone. No. Jonathan, Tommy, Tucker, Mark, another talking point, Lewis trying to buy Grassini. Please no. I don't want to entertain Lewis Hamilton on the show. That's a name. If you're a fan of Formula One, and Lewis, I'm sorry, but that's a name and a thing I do not want to entertain on this show. So I'm not going to even go there. He should be banned from the MotoGP paddock for all it's worth. Marc Marquez, king of the ring, Sachsenring. The track goes left. He loves turning left. Could this be the time we see Marc Marquez win on Ducati? And it's starting to pile up the pressure, right, Mark? You've signed the full factory Ducati ride. you're in the running for this championship, although Assen seriously kicked you in the nuts. How much longer are we going to give this grace period to Mark of, but he's on an older spec bike and Grassini? At the end of the day, it's an 8-time world champion who wanted the move, who shouted at the rooftops, give me the Ducati ride up, I deserve it, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that. But, we always talk about stats. Moto brings in Brad and Darren, and we always talk about stats. Forget the 8-time world champion thing. Forget it. Now, this year, has Mark done enough to qualify for that full factory ride? That is a massive conversation. But we're going to a track now where I think, as I said it last year, gives a good indication of where Mark is as a rider on whatever project he's in. Last year, it failed miserably on the Honda. He was throwing zap signs at it, and he just hated it, and I think that was his decision maker. This year, there can't be many excuses if he doesn't certainly compete top 3 and go for the win. If he's finishing 5th, 6th, 7th at a track that he's dominated for years on a bike that he wanted, question marks.
Yeah, Rob, I think what's going to you spot on the money there. I think Mark is good enough to win at Sachsenring this weekend if Pecco wasn't in the mix. Pecco, so after Barcelona, I would have put almost my house on it that Mark would win in Sachsenring. But then we had Mugello and we had Assen. Yes, they're 2 of Pecco's favorite tracks, but all the riders love them. And he just obliterated everyone. It wasn't a contest. He was just streets ahead. So if Pecco has by his standards now, a bad day at Sachsenring, Mark has to have his best day on a Ducati, I think, just to level the playing field. So I think it's going to be very difficult. What I'm actually going to do this probably tomorrow, I'm going to just go pull up the results from last year just to see where Pecco finished. And did he win? I can't remember. Did he lead? Was he fastest in the sprint race? Let's have a look. That'll give us a good indication. If he won there last year, Mark's got his hands full. Absolutely no doubt. But I do think Mark will have the beating of everyone else because it's his favorite track. There's something about it. We know it's the left-hand, predominantly left-hand turns. I mean, he won there 2 years, 3 years ago, still suffering from his injuries. So he's certainly his odds-on favorite if you take Pecco out of the equation. That's my opinion. And he's really going to... one thing, though, it's not a very fast track. Short lap time, not a fast track. So maybe that difference, which we've seen, the speed difference between the 23 and the 24 will be negated fractionally. Let's have a look and see. But I'd love to see him win, but he's certainly going to have his hands full. He's going to need his A-plus game, and he's going to need Pecco to only bring his A game.
It's not just Pecco, it's Martin as well, because as Wayne Taylor and Brian say, last year it was Martin who won ahead of Pecco. So it's going to be another dance between them. But I do think Pecco is at a level higher than he was last year. Martin, as I said, has got that fire under his arse to take the number 1 plate away. So it's going to be a Martin Pecco story throughout the rest of the season, and you're going to have the likes of Marquez thrown in every now and then, Bastianini, maybe a Vinales, hopefully a Brad in there. But it is like you said, it's not the same as year. MotoGP is not the same this year. The leap that has been found this year, I know. Here, Deep Sea Diver Smith's talking about Bez won on an older spec bike. That was last year. MotoGP has taken such a leap in a year. Bez can't win on a newer spec bike.
Well, he can't even finish in the points.
He's nowhere, So that it's a different level now. That winning on older spec bikes and stuff. And as Moto says here, Marquez fans said he would smash everyone. Now all of a sudden the GP 23 is the reason why Mark's not winning. And it is to a point because Pecco and the GP24 have just got so good. And that's why I don't think you'll be seeing older spec bikes unless Pecco and Martin have really bad weekends. It's about those two. I think those two are just at a level above the rest of them because of the machinery they're also on, but just because of their superpowers at the moment. And Moto says, as he said, and this is a big question for next year, if Mark does not compete week in, week out on that GP25 spec in that full factory team, surely he'll be asking himself questions. We'll be putting an even bigger question mark around him. So, yes, it's great that Marc Marquez has got this full factory Ducati ride. It's not a done and dusted deal. It's not a Marc's going to go blow everyone away and win the championship like we thought he would this year on an older spec Ducati. I still worry about the management of that. But a lot of Wayne Taylor thinks Marc's going to crash this weekend. He's going to land up in, he's going to be pushing too hard to try and do that, to stay with him. As you're talking about Johnny Martins, Marc Marquez, and the kitty litter, he's going to override the bike to keep his reputation going. I could see that happening in a way, although I think Marc needs to get to that point of, if I can't go with him, I've got to settle for third. He's still clawing onto this championship, and I think it's something he needs to focus on. I think it's something he'd be stupid to just say, I don't care about the championship this year, I want to go for wins. I think he's got to look at the bigger championship, and I think he's got to just take those results that are there for the taking, and if they're not, okay, this weekend was a tire pressure problem. Like you said, does the penalty fit the crime? For me, no. Did he gain an advantage? No, he lost time because he was backing off, letting people through and stuff, So there's all those kind of factors that are going to play into it. But I'm intrigued by the Marc Marquez. We said it for so long. Imagine Marc Marquez on a Ducati around Kota and Sachsenring. Kota, crashed out there. We know what he did. Crash. Yeah, he crashed out.
Yeah, and he was in the lead. I remember he just past Aleix to go into the lead.
Yes. So now, Sachsenring is the next big spotlight on Marc Marquez.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Rob, one thing that I think happens, Ducati are doing all their development on the GP24, which is rightfully so. It's going to become the GP25 next year. Are they doing any work on the 23? I'm going to say no. So the bike, Marc, De Gian Antonio, Alex Marquez inherited from the end of last season was very competitive, absolutely no doubt. But the new bike was good at the beginning of this year. And remember, Pecco said straight away it was better than the 23 was at the beginning of 2023. So the new bike, immediately he was happier. Last year, he struggled a while to get that bike to his liking, development. Now the bikes, I would imagine, is getting no development, the 23. But the 24 is getting all the development. So where there are weak points and they're pooling all the data, Ducati are saying, okay, well, if we just do this a little bit better, benefits Marc, Pecco and Martin. It's not helping Marc Marquez at all. And I'm not making excuses for the guy. I think that's why we've suddenly seen that gap has got bigger and bigger again. And Marc's riding it to the best of his ability. But the bike, we saw in Mugello was blatant how fast Bastianini was compared to Marc on that back straight. Marc couldn't even get in the slipstream. So, it's a difficult one for him. I'm not making an excuse for him. Part of me says, same as Kota, he's going to be lightning fast. He's going to override and he's going to end up in the gravel trap. And part of me says he's matured. He knows what the capability of the bike is. And barring a silly little mistake like he made at Assen in the sprint race, he's going to settle for third if that's the best he can do. Because he seems to have got that in his brain that sometimes, by his standards, a poor result is better than no result.
So, breaking it down, listening to what you said and from a couple of comments talking about Marc and the old bike and new bike and whatever, breaking it down as we were talking there, my thinking is this. Pecco was able to take new technology or the latest technology, the latest spec bike, 30 seconds faster at Assen. How can you expect a last year's model to go 30 seconds faster? Marc Marquez, before the penalty, if Brad Binder was 16 seconds faster than last year on his KTM, and he was, before Marc's penalty, 6-7 seconds behind Marc, that means Marc Marquez on the old spec bike was 20 seconds faster.
The Gian Antonio, 8 seconds behind. So, 22 seconds faster than last year.
On the old bike, that's not being developed. So this is the difference now between old and new. Last year, we were talking seconds, 5-10 seconds at most.
Yeah.
These old bikes have to keep up with a guy going 30 seconds faster. So that is the biggest conundrum. And like you said, we don't want to sound like we're saying the GP23 is an excuse. But it certainly has to be taken with some kind of credibility that it is certainly a handicap, because while Pecco and them are able to take new technology even further, can an iPhone 15 do what an iPhone 16 does in terms of camera and storage. No.
Yeah.
Why they develop.
Yeah, exactly.
Break it down. I'm trying to do it as in much layman's terms as I possibly can. So all those factors have to be taken into consideration. That the thing with Marc Marquez is next year he doesn't have any more excuses.
Yeah,
this year
100%.
he kind of had the room for excuses, and a couple of riders had room for excuses. Next year, you're talking about the Aprilia situation. Their biggest handicap for next year potentially is they could be looking at having 4 brand new riders on their bikes, which in a way is a good thing, but certainly in a way it's a good thing because bringing those fresh ideas in. The negative side to that is while Ducati and Pecco are hitting the ground running because it's the norm, while these guys develop for the first 2, 3, 4 races and get comfortable. And we've seen Bezzecchi, he's not comfortable. He's not that same kind of rider. So
yeah.
So many 2025 2024 was going to be and has been mind-blowing. 2025 I don't know what to think of 20. I think we're going to have a talking MotoGP 3 times a week to keep up with what's
happening. Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Paul, I think that's the perfect way to end it. Mariska Hutchinson, guys, I have to go. I'm traveling tomorrow, so I'm up early. Thanks for a great show. Thank you, Mariska, for joining us.
Safe travels.
Yeah, safe travels. Of course, we need to catch up with you next week, Tuesday, before the break kicks in. Bezzecchi finished 1.2 seconds behind Bagnaia last year on a GP22. While I think the GP24 is a bigger step from the GP23 was, you also have to say Bagnaia is growing too and is better than ever. Olimoto. Perfectly well said. Thank you so much to every single person that tuned in all the way from Germany and all over the world, to granddads, nephews, uncles, dads, moms. It's been fantastic as always. So much to talk about. Can't wait to do it again next week, Tuesday, after what I have no doubt is going to be a fantastic weekend in Sachsenring. So let's see what happens this weekend. And Paul, enjoy it wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And I'll catch up with you next week, Tuesday. Olimoto, yes, I will be at Donington Park World Superbikes next week, Friday and Saturday. I can't be there Sunday because I want to get back to my beautiful family. But I will be there. If you're there, please, let's bump into each other, say hello, have a nice, what is it called? Bacon botte. Let's have a nice.
I thought it was called a beer.
No. I don't do pints. I'll do bacon botte. And then I'll also be, for all South African fans, I'll be catching up with our lady riders, Nicole van Asvegen, and I've forgotten her name now. Her name escapes me, the other South African lady rider who I just can't remember her name, runner, Jessica Howden. I'll be catching up with them, doing some exclusive behind-the-scenes footage with them and interviews, so keep a lookout for that. Paul, have a great weekend, and I'll chat to you next week.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for an excellent show, Rob, and to everyone who tuned in and listened and all the comments. Thanks, guys. Absolutely fantastic. Another great weekend ahead of us, and we'll chat next Tuesday.
Yeah, perfectly said. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.